Hi, welcome back to our channel. I'm sure that you're very aware of the current news. Today is, I think it's March 4th. I don't have the date up on my computer. 2020. And I'm sure that you're very aware of the pestilence that is currently going around, known as the coronavirus. I think technically the name is COVID-19, if I'm not mistaken. I've been a little bit concerned about all of the hype, and I have my own opinions about that I don't necessarily want to share here. It's not within the scope of the topic of the day, but nonetheless, the Bible warns us that there would be pestilences in the latter days. I certainly believe that we are seeing that, among other things, tornadoes and earthquakes and just craziness. The world's falling apart at the seams, it seems like. But at any rate, what I wanted to share with you today, I've had a lot of people ask me to make this video, and I've been intending to do it for quite some time, but circumstances in our own lives have prevented me from making videos on just about anything for a while. But what I'm talking about that I would like to show you how I make today is liposomal vitamin C. Where I first learned about it was a friend of mine recommended this book to me on how to make liposomal. It's by Cheryl Hines, and that was kind of my go-to that got me started in making liposomal vitamin C. But I've kind of experimented with making it a little bit, and the recipe that she uses, I've kind of morphed it into my own version, I guess. And I kind of pushed the envelope on it because I didn't feel like there was enough vitamin C in the liposomal that I made from that recipe. And so I tried to push it a little bit to see just how much vitamin C I could get into my liposomal vitamin C. And so I want to show you, I showed you already the ingredients that I use and the tools and equipment. One thing that you will need to invest in is one of these little devices. It's a jewelry cleaner. Now, I know that may sound crazy, you know, to make homemade medicine, but that's the device that's used. The way that it works, I'll explain to you more as we get into making the vitamin C, but this is a necessity if you want to make good liposomal vitamin C. And another thing that I want to mention while we're talking about liposomal technology is that vitamin C is not the only thing you can encapsulate. What did I do with it? Right here, I am recovering from biotoxin illness. The technical name is CIRS, C-I-R-S, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, from mold exposure. And one of the things that happens when you have this biotoxin illness is your glutathione level just tanks. I mean, it bottoms out. And glutathione, in case you don't know, is the master antioxidant in the body. It's produced in the liver, and very important in recovery from anything, really. But I found this, I'll show you up close maybe. I found this one on Amazon, and I'm not sure if it's showing up there. But anyway, it's 25 grams of glutathione, and I figured it out. Usually I use about a teaspoon, and that gives me, I think, 500 milligrams per dose. And that's one of the things that, with the vitamin C, I don't really worry so much about dosage because vitamin C is safe. It's not something that you can overdose on. If you're taking just the powder, which we also use the sea salts brand, and this has, if you haven't seen my video, it's called My Wake Up Call, that's on our channel. I share how at the time that I received an injury, my husband and I were taking large doses of the sea salts, and I developed tetanus. And my doctor and I both believe that the reason that the tetanus didn't develop into full-blown disease was because I was taking high doses of this sea salt. So even this works. But when you take the sea salts, the powder in water, you can get what's called a flush. In other words, if you get too much, you take it to bowel tolerance and your body just evacuates and you will end up with watery stools. so you can't really OD. You could dehydrate yourself, I guess, in theory, if you take too much and just keep diarrhea. But at any rate, it's very safe. The thing that makes liposomal vitamin C different is you encapsulate the vitamin C powder itself within a fat, and I use lecithin, and there's a reason for that, and that's what most everybody uses that I've seen. The lecithin contains something called phosphatidylcholine. Now that's a big word, but if you could just shorten it to choline. Choline and the phosphatidylcholines are very important in cell health, especially the cell membrane, because the cell membrane itself is actually made of these phospholipids. And so when you encapsulate the vitamin C within these little fat molecules, the liposomal vitamin C survives in the stomach, it doesn't break down, and it's absorbed more readily into the bloodstream. Now, I listen a lot to Dr. Thomas Levy, and I really respect the man, because anytime I have a question, I email him, he answers me. He doesn't ignore me, he's very polite, and I have a lot of respect for him. Dr. Russell Jaffe has also answered questions of mine in regards to vitamin C. There's a lot of teaching out there on liposomal vitamin C in particular, but vitamin C in general as well. And according to Dr. Thomas Levy, vitamin C can handle any known bacteria or virus, and even some yeasts and fungus. And so he calls it the primal panacea, I think is the name of his book, if I'm not mistaken. But the liposomal vitamin C is actually even more effective than IV vitamin C. And I found that hard to believe when I first heard it, but I did some research on it, and I found that the research does point to that direction. The reason is because the liposomal vitamin C actually, let's just pretend this is your cell wall, and then you have this little ball of fat with vitamin C on the inside. When it approaches the cell wall, it basically, the fat becomes part of the cell wall, and the vitamin C goes straight inside to the cell. So with IV vitamin C, it's not as effective, and I don't fully understand all of the science behind that, but it's something that I enjoy studying about. And I consider myself I guess a proficient amateur on vitamin C. I'm certainly not an expert like people like Dr. Levy and Dr. Jaffe. But at any rate, I want to share with you today how I make the liposomal vitamin C. And as I said about the glutathione, you can also make liposomal essential oils. I use doTERRA, and you can liposomalize essential oils. I like the turmeric, 70% more effective than the powder. And can you imagine how effective the liposomal would be? At any rate, let me just share with you how I make it. You can use the lecithin granules, but I find for my blender, I have an old Oster, and it's kind of on its last leg, but it works for liposomal vitamin C. I mix, I put a cup of distilled water in my blender, and I don't really measure. Technically, you kind of supposed to, but I don't consider liposomal C rocket science. I give 3 good squeezes in there, and that's about 3 tablespoons. And I'll show you when I actually make it. Blend that until it's well emulsified. You don't see any little blobs of lecithin in the blender or whatever. And then while that's blending, I take, move that out of the way before I mess up. I like to use magnesium ascorbate. You can use calcium ascorbate. Right now I'm using Now brand, but I'm on the search for a different provider. By the way, this sunflower lecithin that I use is also Now brand. It is non-GMO, but it's not organic, and I did not realize that when I bought it, but I'm not about to throw it away, so I'm going to use it up. And then I already purchased some organic sunflower lecithin. I have calcium ascorbate, and I do use that sometimes, but my preference is magnesium ascorbate, because nearly everyone, I think I could probably say everybody, is deficient in magnesium, and so it gives us a little bit of magnesium. Several people have asked me if they can use the sea salts to make the liposomal vitamin C, and I talked to Dr. Levy about that. He does not recommend it because the sea salts is actually buffered with 4 minerals. I think it's calcium, potassium, magnesium, and zinc. Yeah, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and potassium. And his concern was that you potentially could get too much of the other minerals if you use the sea salts. And that is also effervescent. If you're familiar with the old Alka-Seltzer, when you put it in water, it bubbles up. And you should wait until the bubbles are all gone before you drink it. And one other thing on the sea salts is if you don't take it with sufficient water, I usually dissolve a teaspoon in about a cup of water, but then I chase that with another cup of water. If you don't take enough water with it, you could get bloating and terrible gas pains. Okay, let me reposition the camera and I will actually show you what I do to make the liposomal vitamin C. Okay, I have my water in the blender. Now, this little machine that I got off of Amazon, it's called InvisiClean. I had a smaller one and I went ahead and bought a bigger one because I got tired of having to make the liposomal every day or every couple of days. Since my husband and I are both using it, I got one with a little bit larger capacity. I know that you can put at least 3 cups in here, excuse me, and you may be able to fit a little bit more. So I put about 1.5 cups of water, distilled water I use, in my blender. And then you'll see how rockety science here. My measurement is on the liposomal. You see that blob come out? And then I give another blob. Well, it's not blobbing for me today, so okay. That's probably about enough. Usually it comes out in big blobs, but I've used enough out of there. Can you kind of see in the bottom there? It's roughly 3 tablespoons. I've kind of gotten to the point where I know how much 3 tablespoons is, and so I don't have to, I don't necessarily have to measure. I probably should for the video, but I'm not going to. So anyway, I'm not going to subject you to 4 or 5 minutes of blending, but I'm going to turn the camera off, blend this up, and then I'll come back. Okay, that's pretty well blended. If you noticed, I was trying to help with the spatula. There was a little bit of the lecithin stuck to the side of the blender there. So I've dissolved about 3 teaspoons of the magnesium ascorbate in a jar of water. I'm going to turn the blender back on and add it and let these two blend together for just a little bit. Okay, I want to show you one thing, just quick. If you can see, there's just a little bit of residue of the powder. That's how I figured out exactly how much I could use. Actually, I had a little more than 3 teaspoons of the magnesium ascorbate, and I know that because I have a little bit of residue left, and that's okay. You know, you can just put some water in there and drink that. But that's, I wanted to get as much vitamin C in the lecithin as I could. You see there's some foam on here now, and that's an interesting thing. We'll talk about the foam aspect in just a little bit. Usually whenever I make the vitamin C, I make it a half gallon at a time. I fill one of these, and that will last my husband and I for a week. Especially if we're, you know, like we've had some guests recently that were not well, and we take more of it during times like that. I set the time for the highest amount of minutes. 600 seconds is the highest that my machine will go, and then you just pour the mixture in and turn it on. Now, it's good to leave this covered while it's working. but it also likes to be stirred. The more you stir it, the better encapsulation you get. 10 minutes is the highest that my machine will go. So usually what I'll do is I'll let this run in this machine. Usually I go about 15 minutes to thoroughly encapsulate. Now what this is doing is it sends little ultrasonic impulses to the sides of this thing. The inside of it is stainless steel, and that hits the mixture that's in here. Now right now in my blender this is emulsified, it's blended fairly well, but to get it to encapsulate you need this activity of this machine. It actually, by hitting the sides of this solution, it forces the vitamin C, it makes little bubbles out of the fat molecule, which is all this foam that you see is lecithin. So when it hits the fat molecule, it makes a little bubble and drives the vitamin C inside, and that's what causes the encapsulation. So I'm just going to kind of let this run for a while. Again, keep it covered, but take the lid off to stir. And I stir it usually about once every minute or two. Again, the more you stir it, the better encapsulation you get. Okay, so we'll come back in just a little bit and show you the finished product. Okay, I've let this run about 15 minutes here, and I think that is sufficient. Now, when I get ready to put it into my jar, I don't try to just pour it because invariably it's going to go everywhere. I use a measuring cup and put it in a little bit at a time, and that works well for me. When you get down to the very end, you have to pour it, but it's much easier with just a little bit in there. You see, I'm not spilling any. And then I just wipe it off the edge, and I'm ready for my next. And while I was letting this one process, I blended up my second batch. So this batch is ready to go into the machine. This one I blended a little bit more. I had a little bit more water so that I was able to use all of the vitamin C that I wanted to. It tends to fall out of solution if, of course, the solution gets saturated if you have too much powder to water. Okay, so we'll let this process. I'm going to make a ½ gallon, and that's pretty much it. Okay, while my second batch is processing here in the jewelry cleaner, I wanted to share one more thing with you that is a little bit beneficial to know. And I didn't know this until recently, and I did it, and I found out that I was getting roughly between a 65 and 70% encapsulation, and that's pretty good for homemade liposomal vitamin C. Even the store-bought ones are not 100% encapsulated. But I found a way to test that, to see, and I'm not gonna demonstrate. I'm just going to tell you how to do it. And the reason I'm not going to demonstrate it is because you have to use baking soda. And since I don't ingest baking soda, I don't want to sacrifice part of my liposomal vitamin C. But here's how you do it. You take 4 ounces of your finished solution, liposomal vitamin C, put it in a 12-ounce jar. So you have 4 ounces of the solution, the liposomal C, in a 12-ounce jar, and then you mix together 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda in 1 ounce of distilled water. Once that baking soda is dissolved in the distilled water, then you pour it into the liposomal vitamin C. And the way that you tell your amount of encapsulation is by, when you put the baking soda into the liposomal C, it's going to react with whatever vitamin C is not encapsulated, and it's going to foam up. If you have 1/2 inch of foam on the top, you have about a 50% encapsulation. If you have 3/8 inch or less, you have about a 60% encapsulation. And if you have a 1/8 inch thick foam on the top, you have about a 75%. And mine was between the 1/8 and 3/8. It was probably a little less than a fourth of an inch. So I figured I was probably getting 65 to 70% encapsulation, and that's pretty good for homemade. So if I forgot anything, just shoot me a question. I'll be happy to answer if I know the answer, and if I don't, I'll find out, because I want to know all that I can about this topic. Now, one other thing that I would like to say about particularly the coronavirus. You know, I've got a seminar playing right now on it with Dr. Andrew Saul. I'm trying to learn what I can about it, but honestly, from what I am hearing, it's no more deadly than other flu viruses. In fact, back in 2010, I had the H1N1 swine flu, and I like to have died. If it hadn't been for my friends Judy and Marge, I probably would have. But I'm indebted to them for nursing me through that.